Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm doing a series of videos to kind of highlight different areas of policy as we build up to the election decision in October. This particular presentation is going to focus on foreign policy. The reason why I'm doing this is because there's a lot of rhetoric going back and forth, and especially since we've seen some really tragic photos of the issues facing the Syrian people that have been kicked out of their homeland due to the ongoing civil war in their area. But it's not just going to be about Syria, it's going to be a holistic view of policies in terms of governing everything from foreign policies as we move forward. I'm touched by anything that happens in the world where people are displaced. So I decided to put together a few slide decks to talk about different aspects of foreign policy. So in essence, Canada has what we call as a foreign affairs department. That department gets involved with a multitude of issues. Some of that's related to helping citizens outside the country. So there's foreign affairs officers, embassies elsewhere in the world. They work with government, whether that's policies or relationships to build things, because the world's more of a globalization place. The other part of foreign affairs is we belong to several different groups. NATO, which is the North American Treaty Organization, and those of you who have taken historical history courses in Canada will know NATO came out of the part of the post-war effort to kind of put together countries together as a military bloc to respond if there's an issue of some sort of nature, whether it's a threat from war of governments, it could be a natural disaster, it could be any sort of NATO options that's required of basically members who need help from other countries. It was a way of a bloc put together. I won't go into the historical nature of NATO, but it is something you need to be aware of. UN is another organization that was established to kind of help other countries out, and Canada is a member of UN too, as well as actually a founding member, and I'll get into that. What I really want to focus on is some of the money that Canada gives out every year is to what we call as foreign aid. This foreign aid goes to helping developing countries, and you'll see in this particular map that Canada has given about 110 million to Syria over the last year or so. We've done work in Haiti, we've done work in Ukraine, we've done work in many countries here where we've given money to help these countries. Now, foreign aid is supposed to hopefully filter down to the people that need it, whether it's clean watering systems, whether it's help with roads, education, whether it's help with food, farming and stuff like that, agricultural sector. That's all part of what we're supposed to do with foreign aid. Now, you won't hear this discussion talk by Mulcair or even Justin Trudeau, because first of all, they don't really like to highlight what the government has done because their whole goal is negativity, but they will pick apart particular policies that basically feel that Harper hasn't done a great job on, as a way to kind of paint the picture that Harper is not liked worldwide, which is necessarily a true statement. But I wanted to highlight the foreign aid here so that you kind of get a gist of the next government. Now, Canada is a founding member of the UN, that's the United Nations, and the United Nations has multiple agencies within that group, and part of their role is to respond to different issues across the world, right? Whether it's refugee status, floods, natural disasters, or anything else, they basically can put the mandate together to help mobilize the world in terms of respond of a tragedy or a situation where they need to be involved. Maybe a situation what we've seen in Yugoslavia, when the Yugoslavian countries broke up, like the Serbs and all that, they sent in peacekeepers into Bosnia and Herzegovina as part of monitoring peace agreements and stuff like that. Now, those only work where you've got areas where you've got treaties involved and where you can help peace. If there are not areas where they are secured and peacekeeping can be used, then you wouldn't be sending UN peacekeeping troops in. It's a key thing here to drive this is because the way the UN works and the way Mulcair has positioned it, he wants to get back to peacekeeping. Well, peacekeeping doesn't make any sense unless you're in an area where you've got peacekeeping required. That being said, you still need the equipment and the manpower to support peacekeeping efforts. That means you still need the troop carriers, you still need the boats, you still need the helicopters and all that. So you're going to still need the equipment. Whether you go into a combat role or a peacekeeping role, you still need the equipment. Let's talk about Agenda 21. This is a very critical agenda that most cases Justin Trudeau has been quoted on. You can go do a YouTube video. He did a quick one-off conversation on that, and he basically has said point blank that he supports Agenda 21, which is sustainable development. The UN basically is pushing Agenda 21 on country, which basically takes away certain democracies in terms of the way countries operate. And one of the comments is they're against damming river flows. Well, Canada basically generates a good portion of its electrical power needs through hydro. And that's Quebec and all that. So if you push Agenda 21, then you're pushing controls away from how a country operates. This is very critical because both Mulcair and both Justin Trudeau support, in theory, sustainable development, which in theory is Agenda 21. So these are questions you should be asking yourself: is where do the leaders like Mulcair and Justin Trudeau stand on Agenda 21? UN and refugees. Whenever there's a crisis, so people have been displaced and they go into refugee camps, whether that's been in the South Sudan, whether that's been up into Turkey and Syria where they're being pushed out, the UN gets involved as a way to kind of register these people and do an evaluation. Okay, so that's why when you hear all these comments about Canada being involved with airlifting 10,000 refugees that Thomas Mulcair is saying, first of all, we need to take a step back here. We need to work with the UN to make sure who we're bringing in are registered and they're legitimate people. Okay, typically when we've gone to Vietnam, we basically have known what these guys are. We know they're refugees. You can look at them. You can see the famine with them. They've been starving. You can see the abuse that they've taken, right? The key that you have to be careful here when you're starting to deal with some areas where we've got huge impact of terrorism targets is sometimes these terrorist targets can use refugees to carry out jihad events. And that's why when Stephen Harper's been criticized, he supports refugees, but he wants to make sure we do it the right way in terms of supporting them and bringing them in. He doesn't want this to become just a political statement in an election campaign. It's not like these refugee issues in Syria were there last year. Paul Duer was there in Turkey back in September 2014. He seems to be non-existent on comments related to refugee policy. He was there. So why now? Because it's an election. Why? Because he's pandering, saying that Harper is this unemotional person that doesn't care about helping people, which is not true. He wants to do it the right way. And if I'm a Canadian, I want I want to be protected, and I want to make sure that we support these people and help them, but I want to make sure that I am also protected myself and my family. Let's talk about UN and its security members. UN has 15 members on what they call the Security Council. 5 of them are permanent, which are China, France, Russia, UK, and United States. The rest of them are what we call is non-permanent. And what non-permanent means is they're on a rotational cycle. They either 2 to 3 years they go on renewal. And look at the key aspect here. You've got Jordan on there. Jordan has been a great supporter of the missions going into Iraq and going into Syria to kind of support pulling out that ISIS. The king of Jordan actually flew some missions when one of their pilots was killed, part of the ISIS process that we're doing in terms of murdering people. So basically Jordan is a key member of that. That's good that you've got a Middle Eastern. What I'm more surprised that one of the key players in there has said very little about this whole ISIS crisis is Saudi Arabia. Now, if you're going to solve some of the issues in the Middle East, it has to be a made-in-Arab solution. Yet, when we talk about refugees and taking that, the Arab nations themselves have not taken enough accountability of helping those same Arab countries. Why? Because it's territorial there. These countries don't always like each other, so therefore they're pushing the problem onto the rest of the world to fix. If Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE and even Iran decided that they were going to step up the bat, and maybe we might have a better resolution to solving this issue in the Middle East. So that's one of the things you're not going to hear about. This is deep issues there. The other thing that I want to link up to as well is talking about the fact is that there's history there, but let's take a step back there. Canada has a role to play in any sort of mission. Harper's always stood up for human rights, and he always will continue to stand up there. I'm not sure where the NDP stands on, and I'm not sure where the Liberal Party stands on, and I'll get into that further. Now I want to kind of talk about UN peacekeeping efforts, right? Now, Canada gets called in to take part in peacekeeping efforts. We went into the South Sudan. We actually have sent in our DART into different areas at request of the UN, and we've done things. We've done things over our history of peacekeeping. But the issue has been the last probably decade or so, there's been less and less peacekeeping and more particular missions, either called on by a particular act of NATO or called on by because of local governments asking for help to stamp out a threat. Now, if you listen to Thomas Mulcair and you listen to Trudeau speak, you listen to them that we should all be sitting in the background and making cookies and not doing anything to help these countries, which is not necessarily the way the Canadians have done. The Canadian military has been very good and very strong over the decades and years it's been in existence. Canada doesn't back away from a problem. Canada goes in and supports other countries to help stamp out an issue. If you elect an NDP government, then you're standing up for a country that will take lesser a degree on human rights and less a degree to help other countries protect themselves. That's not the Canadian way. And I'm sorry, but if you start electing an NDP government, Liberal, you're going to go against the way of Canada helping people. This is just giving you an example of peacekeeping. I showed you the Sudan that we went in there, and it shows you the personnel. Haiti, that was with the earthquake stuff. Ethiopia, we have ongoing missions right now in terms of Congo and a few other areas as well. But this kind of just highlights that we have been doing peacekeeping, especially since 2005, 2009. Harper's been in power, so he's been involved with that. Let's talk about current operations now. Canada is part of NATO. So what you don't hear from Justin Trudeau and Thomas Mulcair is Canada's role to play in NATO. So if a NATO country is attacked, it's an attack on NATO. Okay, Mulcair can say what he wants, or Trudeau can say what they want, but Canada has to respond as part of its obligations and commitments to NATO. Turkey is a member country of NATO. So for example, if ISIS went in and attacked NATO, that's an attack on NATO. So Canada doesn't sit back in the ground making cookies and doing other things. Canada would have to respond with the rest of the NATO member countries to support Turkey. Okay, so that's not what you're hearing about. The second thing here is we are already involved with counterterrorism activities in the Mediterranean. That's been ongoing. That's an ongoing commitment NATO has done. We've sent boats there periodically to help manage the flow of things and stop the terrorism. Now, the key aspect that I want to drive here is that all we hear about from the NDP and the Liberals is the opposed to ISIS. They have never said anything about honoring current NATO commitments. Why? Because they're scared to talk about those commitments. The ISIS thing is a little different, so they can play on the emotion on that with the refugees, but they're not talking about NATO. And since we still have NATO commitments, we still have to put money into our military to support NATO. That's why Stephen Harper has looked at modernizing the frigate fleet both for domestic and also our NATO commitments over time. I would encourage you to go watch a video. I've done one on military spending to kind of align how that military spending has to align to both domestic support and international responsibility. Let's talk about ISIS threat now. We can all argue that part of the way ISIS and ISIL was created is it's a branch of Al-Qaeda, and it's also the way people are starving, and they fostered that environment where a new group, a fundamental group, came into play. We can argue that. We can argue how the U.S. pulled out too soon. It doesn't matter the cause and effect, how it happened. What we do need to do is how do we resolve the issues with ISIS or ISIL. ISIL is only interested in creating their own caliphate area, which means it's either with them or against them. So if you're a Christian or a non-believer in the ISIS or ISIL religion, they basically are going to purge you. This is no different than what happened in the 1930s and 40s with World War II, where Hitler purged the Jews. They were purging their own belief that. So Mulcair and Trudeau can say that we need not to be there, but the point is they've already shown this group is that they want their own caliphate area, and what's to stop them from expanding that caliphate area outside the Middle East to other areas? We've already seen pressure in countries where Sharia law has come into play, whether that's in the UK or into Sweden, and this is things that we need to be very, very careful about, that we allow people to express their religion, but within certain amount of control. But that's not what you're going to hear from Mulcair and Trudeau, because basically with Trudeau, he's basically playing to some of this votes because he wants their votes. Now, there's another reason why he's doing that as well. Omar Al-Hagra, who is his foreign policy advisor, and Michel Trudeau, who is also the foreign policy advisor for Justin Trudeau, actually have connections to either the Palestinians or to the Iranian governments or to Saudi Arabia. So their policy statements are going to align to what they personally believe. In the case of Omar Al-Hagra, he has a certain belief of Islamic fundamental ways of doing things. In the case of Michel Trudeau, he supported Iran and made a video on Iran. He's also spent time with Palestinians. There's nothing wrong with going to the Palestinian area and spending time to get that perspective. But you have an issue if you do not get the same example of the Israelis on the same perspective. I take the approach that you need to look at all angles of policies, and you need to kind of look at the best way to fix things. But I'm not running for election. I'm just highlighting the facts. This particular slide I wanted to show you, the UN's been involved registering. So we've got 4 million people that have been kind of displaced that were registered that we have to help in Syria. Now, Canada has a role to play in this, and that means they need to coordinate with the UN. But you have not heard that from Mulcair, and you have not heard that from Justin Trudeau. Now let's talk about a couple things. This kind of feeds into things, that the inconsistencies with statements. Okay, there's a video on YouTube. You can go check it out. It's Andrew Leslie talking with Power and Politics Evan Solomon about the crisis in Syria. And his comments were the biggest threat to peace there, the threat to governments, is the refugees. These people that are caught up the border in refugee camps that will find the next basically wave of fundamentalists. Well, he's got some validity to that point, but the real threat is, why are these people there? They're being pushed out because of their religious beliefs. They're being pushed out because if they don't leave, they'll be beheaded or killed. Yet you do not hear that from Leslie. So I'm not sure if he's basically taking statements from his Mr. Justin Trudeau to kind of take this a little bit political statement in terms of a diplomatic approach, because that seems to be incoherent from a guy like Andrew Leslie, who was a military person in Afghanistan and seen what goes on with some of these groups. Okay, we saw what happened in Afghanistan with the Taliban. So to make comments like that and being only narrow looking at the refugee but not looking at the whole issue of why they're there, that's a dangerous comment. And that also tells you that that's possibly the policies that Justin Trudeau will have. Let's talk about the NDP. Paul Dewar was the foreign affairs critic for the NDP party. He comes out and he's appalled at the human rights violations. Yet, the NDP stance is, it's not Canada's battle. So you don't like the human rights, so what are you going to sit back and do? Do nothing? Are you going to just basically say, you know what? Call them up? You're going to go fly there and talk to Baghdadi, who's over ISIS, and say, listen, Mr. Baghdadi, we think you should treat people better. You think that's going to work? You think you're going to be able to deal with these radical groups that way? No, you're not. So the NDP comment is basically saying we don't support it, but we're not going to do anything about it. Now, that's a dangerous game in terms of foreign affairs policy. It seems to me that they feel the only way to settle this stuff is diplomacy. You can't have diplomacy with a group that doesn't want to listen. So sometimes the only best diplomacy is a machine gun. And I don't mean that directly, but sometimes you have to purge these nasty people, you know, because these nasty people aren't going to go away, but you just saying, please play nice. And that seems to be the NDP's policy. You know, they seem to think that you can go in and convert these people into believing certain things or changing their ways. That doesn't necessarily work. Now that kind of wraps up in a nutshell foreign affairs. Would I be very careful when you start listening to this? Is the refugee issue is important, but to compare the refugee issue to what happened in Vietnam is a fallacy. What happened in the 70s with Vietnam is these guys weren't terrorists or stuff like that. There wasn't a threat that these refugees would be causing pain to people. So we were able to assist better there. This particular area in Syria is scary because we've already know that that basically ISIS or ISIL has basically said they will use refugees to carry out jihad events. So we need to be very careful in the approach we do. We need to support it, but we need to make sure things are the right way. What I would suggest you do is look beyond the rhetoric and quick statements from the NDP as well as the Liberal government, and also stop looking at that they're trying to paint Harper as this unemotional person. It's not just about emotion, okay? We all have our hearts. You also have to think logically on the facts. What do we want to do to help these people and to make it the right way to do things? That's the thing that you need to drive yourself when you're talking to these people. Thank you so much.